Is Vancouver in a buyer's market? Contrary to all the doom and gloom headlines, if you're looking at just the numbers, no. Technically, it's a balanced market, averaged out across all three of the property types. If you're looking at condos and townhouses, they sit in balanced. If you're looking at detached homes, they're sitting in a buyer's market right now. But as the saying goes, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. The media loves to push the whole doom and gloom end of the world narrative, but if you actually look at the stats, technically we are in a balanced, albeit leaning towards a buyer's market, because most balanced markets are either headed in one direction or the other. So if you're looking at the inventory numbers, which are 37.9% above the 10-year average, it's safe to say that we are closer to a buyer's market than we are a seller's market. However, that doesn't necessarily tell the entire story. And if you think about it, and with all the news in terms of tariffs, the war, uh, economic uncertainty, AI, unemployment numbers, inflation as a result of higher energy prices, affordability, uncertainty regarding the future of the country, uncertainty regarding municipal and provincial legislations, the First Nations thing. The list goes on and on. The point is, despite all of this, it is still a balanced market based off of these numbers. I'm not saying that we aren't headed toward a buyer's, and there aren't certainly more areas that are being affected than others as it relates to being in a buyer's market than not. But the numbers are the numbers, and that might prompt the question, well then, did Vancouver ever technically have a buyer's market? And if we're looking historically, that answer starts to get interesting. Let's go into the stats. All right, so this goes back 20 years. We're looking at the monthly averages in terms of sales to active listings ratios in Greater Vancouver. Right, historically, 20% and above is considered a seller's market. 42% being two times as much as that is quite an understatement. So, in terms of seller's market, so we have 60%, 21%, so still sellers. Going back as 2012, 8%. Okay, for how long did we stay there? November, okay. Early 2013, things start to go back to balanced. And then by the end of 2014, it is, oh, still, okay. End of 2014, starting to get into seller's territory. And then boom, it just kind of spikes up and then back down. Still sellers. The bear market of 2017, balanced. 2018, how long did that last? Okay, no, within 6 months or 8 months. So basically within a couple months, back to balanced, and then by the end of, by the beginning of the next year, back to sellers. 2020, of course, being the exception, and then it rebounded hard the other way. And then these numbers, you'll see like 58%, 48%, 40%. What that translates to in reality on the ground is, multiple offers, subject free, just bidding wars and things going crazy. On paper, it's basically just showing that for every 100 listings that come to market, there's 41 buyers for it. Just dividing the sales by the active listings. But in practice, it's things can get quite aggressive. But yeah, if you're looking going back 20 years, looking at the monthly averages, it doesn't stay in even in 2008. Let's see what we had. So about 4%. That's actually extremely low. Four buyers for every 100 listings. 2009, and then that was January, and then okay, by March back to balanced, and then by the end of the year back to sellers. And then if you're looking at what that meant in terms of price, just a straight and then flat, from 2008, 420, and upwards and onwards. That's for the median. If you're looking at the average, uh, slightly higher than that. But so the sales to active listings ratio on these are based off of all property types, all price points, just dividing the total number of sales by active listings, right? And as doom and gloom as it seems out there, in terms of macroeconomic uncertainty regarding Canada and it being pretty negative, despite all that, we're still not in firm buyer's market territory across the board. We could be headed in that direction, but historically, even then, it doesn't seem like it stays. Historical perspective is important because at any given period of time, there's always doom and gloom, right? So, like, even if you go to like 2008, which mostly affected the United States, but there was still uncertainty regarding the rest of the world, you really only had super negative sales to active listings ratio for a few months, and then it was back to normal. And even now, with the immigration being slowed, with tariffs, with higher energy prices, with higher interest rates, we still haven't been in a firm buyer's market for some time. Fraser Valley is a bit different. Fraser Valley getting hit harder, in large part, I'd imagine, due to the immigration wave. You have newer families coming in. There's not as much mortgage-free equity inside of the Fraser Valley. So basically, it hasn't had the same time for that high equity-free ownership as the Greater Vancouver. And interestingly, when it comes to the sales to active listings ratios and the last month stats, things can vary quite a bit depending on where you're looking for and the product type and category that you're after, right? So let's look at, so let's say, for example, you have Fairview, right? They're still in seller's market territory. That's for, let's see, let's break this down by, say if you wanted apartments, so seller's market territory, but not as much. If you wanted townhouses, seller's market territory, but there's inventory of townhouses in Fairview isn't that high. So the total number of sales data is probably not going to be that crazy. So it's going to be like 7 or 8 versus apartments sales. Those numbers are higher compared to the listings. But the reason I bring this up is just to show that what you see in the news versus what's reflected in the data for specific neighborhoods as well as areas, as well as a historical context for what Vancouver prices and demand looks like, those few things don't always line up the way that the narrative that's being said, right? They want people to believe that it's either doom and gloom and end of the world, or it's going to the moon and it's never coming down, you know? Looking at the historical context of Vancouver's sales to active listings ratio, it doesn't necessarily stay down for too long. Whether that trend changes or stands, time will tell, but are we above average in inventory, below average in sales, and could we go more so into a buyer's market with that listing ratio dropping quite a bit? Absolutely, and I'll be here updating you on it as that comes about. But if anything, this is a cooling off period and an after effect of unsustainable kind of gains that we saw in 2020 to 2022. Basically, it's not the end of the world if you've been watching a lot of the doom and gloom stuff. There's certainly some sectors being hit more so than others, like newer condo inventory and pre-sales. But by and large, historically, it's just part of the game, right? If you would like any more information about a specific area that you might be interested in, my contact information is in the description below, and you can subscribe if you would like to see more of these kind of videos.